Above all, he was a leader, he was a commander, and he was a mentor to all of us.
In what seems to be an Idi Amin Dada re-emergence, there is this new scary military leader in Kenya. His name is Lieutenant General John Mugaravai Omenda, a former Major General and Commander of the Kenya Air Force, who was promoted on May 2, 2024, by the Kenyan President William Ruto, to the rank of Lieutenant General, and subsequently appointed as the Vice Chief of the Kenya Defence Forces, what in other countries is called the Vice Chief of the General Staff. The appointment to the rank of Vice Chief of the Defence Forces makes Lieutenant General John Mugaravai Omenda the nation's second highest ranking military official, deputizing the Chief of the Defence Forces. And this also makes him the next in line to serve as Kenya's CDF. And what has gotten our attention about him is his striking resemblance to former Ugandan President, Field Marshal Alhaji Idi Amin Dada, who ruled Uganda as head of state from 1971 to 1979. If you've reached this far in watching this video, perhaps you must have already noticed a thing or two between these two sons of East Africa, and we will highlight a few striking similarities between them that would make one to conclude that they might be related. But before we proceed, let's take a moment to look at each of the two's biography. According to the Kenya Defence Forces, Lieutenant General John Mugaravai Omenda joined the Kenya Air Force on May 23, 1991, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant on August 14, 1992, and he trained as a fighter pilot, and has also trained in other fields, including intelligence, security and flight safety. He is a graduate of the Defence Staff College of Kenya, and the United Kingdom's Royal College of Defence Studies, and holds a diploma in strategic studies from the University of Nairobi, a Bachelor of Arts in Peace and Conflict Studies from Nazarene University, and a Master of Arts in International Security and Strategy from King's College in London. He was promoted to the rank of Brigadier, and appointed Base Commander of the Laikipia Air Base on July 13, 2018, and later appointed as the Deputy Air Force Commander on April 30, 2020, later to Air Force Commander in 2021. Previously, he had held various appointments in training, command and staff, including Deputy Base Commander of the Laikipia Air Base, Flight Commander, Operations Commander, Pilot No. 15 Squadron, and Hawk Squadron Pilot. He also served in the United Nations mission in Liberia from 2006 to 2007, and hails from Vihiga County, in the Maragoli subtribe of the Luhya ethnic community, that occupies a big part of western Kenya, and slightly some parts of eastern Uganda. Then when we cross over to Uganda, the famous Idi Amin Dada, who was born in 1928, at Nakasero Hills Shimoni Police Barracks in Kampala, joined school in 1941, and left after a few years, with only a 4th grade English language education, and did odd jobs before being recruited to the British Army in 1946, as an assistant cook. And would only work as an assistant cook in the British Army for 1 year, at the same time receiving military training up to 1947, when he was transferred to Kenya for infantry service, where he served in the 21st King's African Rifles Infantry Battalion in Gilgil until 1949. That same year, his unit was deployed to northern Kenya to fight against Somali rebels, and in 1952, his brigade was deployed against the Mau Mau rebels in Kenya, subsequently being promoted to the rank of corporal that same year, then to sergeant in 1953. In 1959, Idi Amin Dada was promoted to FND Class 2, or rather Warrant Officer, which was the highest rank possible for a black African in the colonial British military of that time, and after 12 years in Kenya, he returned to Uganda that same year, and received a short service commission as a lieutenant, on July 15, 1961, becoming one of the first 2 Ugandans to become commissioned officers. Then in 1962, following Uganda's independence from the United Kingdom, Amin was promoted to captain, and to major just a year later. He was appointed Deputy Commander of the Army in 1964, and the following year, he was promoted by President Milton Obote to the rank of Colonel and appointed the Commander of the Army. In 1970, he was promoted to Commander of all the armed forces of Uganda, but the post would be short-lived for him, since in October 1970, Obote took control of the armed forces, reducing Amin from his months-old post of Commander of all the armed forces to the previous one of the Commander of the Ugandan Army. and upon learning that President Milton Obote was planning to arrest him for misappropriating army funds, Idi Amin seized power in a military coup on January 25, 1971, while Obote was attending that year's Commonwealth Summit meeting in Singapore, and throughout his life, he's said to have had at least 40 children, born to him by his publicly known wives, as well as privately kept concubines. So, now that we have a brief background of the two, let's head straight to looking at the obvious similarities between Kenya's Mugaravai and Uganda's Amin Dada. Number 1. Both have the same skin tone. Perhaps this is the most obvious and easy to note similarity between Vice CDF John Mugaravai and Field Marshal Idi Amin, whereby they all have a dark chocolate skin tone. Number 2. Both have similar facial expressions and gestures when speaking. From our introductory clip and this juxtaposition, perhaps you can easily spot that as they speak, both the Kenyan Vice CDF and Idi Amin Dada move their facial muscles and heads in a similar manner, to effectively convey their messages to their audiences. Number 3. Both speak at the same rate. While facing the microphone in a public space, they both speak slowly, in a composed manner and churn out words at a relatively similar rate, in what appears like them listening to whatever they're saying.
On behalf of all airmen, women, and the entire Kenya Defence Forces, I want to condole with the family.
Number 4. Their eyes are strikingly piercing and intimidating. Coupled with their no-nonsense faces, Lieutenant General John Mugaravai, just like Idi Amin Dada, can easily scare you, just by making eye contact with you. Number 5. Both are military commanders. Just like Idi Amin Dada, who was the commander of the Ugandan army before being appointed to what translates to a chief of the Ugandan People's Defence Forces, Lieutenant General John Mugaravai, who just came from commanding the Kenya Air Force, is, as we earlier said, the next in line, and will be the next chief of the Defence Forces upon the retirement of the current CDF, General Charles Kahiriri. Number 6. They both have a similar walking style, and walk while slightly leaning their upper bodies forward, or slightly bent their heads. Anyway, there are some dissimilarities between Idi Amin and the Kenyan Vice CDF, among them being that the Kenyan one is much more learned than the former Ugandan leader, that he speaks much more fluent English than Idi Amin, and that Idi Amin had way more kids and wives than what Mugaravai has today, that's 1 wife and 4 children. Of course, Idi Amin Dada was way taller than the next Kenyan Chief of Defence Forces, and much more irritable and impulsive than Mugaravai.
And I am speaking from the bottom of my heart, not written speech.